stuff about that post that
Extremely
decided.
bizarre.
I know, like, there are sometimes, especially if I'm high and going through social media, I'll see stuff like that. I'm like, did I just have a stroke? Like, I'm reading this and I don't understand a word that's being said to me. Like,
That's seriously what the
nonsense.
sentences are like. It means nothing.
Hi, I'm Jacob Kenny.
And I'm Liam McPherson.
It's the newest edition of the only podcast Danielle Smith won't make a fool of herself on. It's
Speech from the Throne, episode 20. We are here to bring you the latest and greatest from the halls of power.
But not with another half-hearted apology followed by no action whatsoever. We're just here to argue.
Hey Jacob, what are we talking about today?
Well, Liam, as I teased in the opening, I'd like to talk about the papal apology for residential schools. Or what I should say is what was billed as a papal apology for residential schools. Unfortunately, at the end of this trip, we heard many apologies, many addresses, but we never really got to the root of what the Catholic Church had done. Yes, the Pope was willing to apologize for bad apples who did terrible things in residential schools, but he was never willing to use terms like cultural genocide. He was never willing to admit that the Catholic Church had been involved in a system of cultural genocide against Indigenous people in Canada for more than a century. And that is a terrible exemption. More generally, we in Canada, we need to rethink our relationship with this church and with this organization. Because this is not the one and only time that the Catholic Church in its more than 2,000-year history has failed to live up to its own moral standards. And this is an institution that for thousands of years has been aiding and abetting colonial projects that have killed tens of millions of people. It has a long history, a centuries-long history of corruption, and more recently, in our day and age, has been hiding molestation by its priests. We've relied way too long on this organization's own moral compass to guide itself, not wanting to intervene, and that can't go any further. As the Pope himself has proved, Pope Francis proved in Canada, when you rely on the church, you will not get anything more than a half-hearted apology that does not fully recognize its own complicity. Thankfully, there's another alternative. Right now in Canada, it's estimated by the Centre for Inquiry 2019 that we lose between $1.5 to $3 billion per year in religious tax credits. Now, I wouldn't suggest taxing every single church in all of the country, but for something as large as the Catholic Church, which isn't just one of the wealthiest organizations in the world, it's one of the wealthiest organizations in the history of the world. They can definitely afford to pay taxes. This is an organization that has caused unbelievable devastation. And it's not just a few mealy-mouthed words from the Pope that are going to solve this problem. It's real investments in the communities that they sought to destroy that's going to solve the problem. And for that, we need money. The Catholic Church caused the problems. The Catholic Church should pay for the solutions. Now, I'm not the only one that said this. In 2005, the Catholic Church itself admitted that it had caused real devastation to the community through the settlement on the 2005 case of Indian residential schools. It promised a $29 million payment, and then furthermore made a $25 million charity commitment. Well, that $29 million settlement got eaten away in fees and deductions. Barely any of that ever got to survivors of residential schools. And as for that $25 million commitment, the Canadian government allowed the Catholic Church to convert that into in-kind donations. And guess what those in-kind donations were? More preaching, more religious counseling services. And so the Indian residential schools, which was a case of forced conversion on the Indigenous people, the Catholic Church's solution to that was more forced conversion. But this time, forced conversion that the Canadian taxpayer wrote off. We cannot allow this to keep continuing. We cannot allow it. They're making the same mistakes over and over again, and now they're demanding that our government, that our people be complicit in their crimes. Absolutely unacceptable. We need to tax these guys. They're a massive business. They've been a business for 2,000 years. It's time we treated them as such. Take as much as we can get from them, and then use that money to improve the lives of their victims.
Well, the first thing is the fact that, he came over here and showed some remorse is historic, I suppose. However, he didn't apologize for the sexual abuse. He didn't apologize on behalf of the whole Catholic Church. He just said Christians more broadly, and he downplayed it and made it sound like they were more hands-off when they were actually oftentimes encouraging the federal government to further develop the residential school program. I don't know if you know this, Jacob, but I don't think I told you, but earlier today I was reading an article from APTN about Joanne Rivoire. He's a priest living in Lyon, France, and he used to live in Nunavut. He lived in Nunavut for 30 years, and he worked as a priest with residential school students, among other things. And he's accused by, I believe, 5 people of some sort of sexual misconduct or sexual assault. In some cases, they managed to track him down and they interviewed him, and he of course denies he did anything wrong. And they're like, here's a picture of 2 of your victims, and he goes, I don't know who they are. And then they're like, okay, well then why don't you just talk to the RCMP and sort it all out? And he's like, oh, why would I do that? I'm not going to go there. Why would I do that? I can't go there because my health would be hard on me. The trip would be hard on me. My health problems are worse, blah, 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 blah. Like, he kind of just dances around it and like, oh, it was too long ago. I don't remember anything, blah, 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 blah. So it's like, it's a little sus, to say the least. And apparently there's been pressure from the oblates to an extent, but they're invisible in Canada on the issue of priests who are now not living in the country, and extradition of priests who were accused of wrongdoing, who should be investigated. And like, I saw another little tidbit earlier today where apparently there was a mistranslation of the Pope's speech that the Vatican has reached out to clarify, the Pope's people. So he spoke in Spanish because that's his first language, and that's fine. And it was translated to English. And apparently there was a wording he used where like, something needs to be investigated, or there must be a thorough investigation or something like that. And apparently the Pope actually meant there must be a thorough search.
Search. Uh-huh.
So they've downplayed it from investigation to search, and saying he didn't mean investigation, he meant search.
More proof that these people cannot be trusted to fix their own house.
Because they have to PR everything to make it sound less worse. It's like, no, own it. Like, Jacob and I took the same political management course in university, and some advice we got from visiting consultants was only have one bad day.
Yep. Just
one bad day. And so many PR people don't understand, because they'll try to over PR something when it first comes out. When it first comes out and it's damning, the first and best thing you can do is be open, cooperative, and offer some sort of contrition if you committed the wrongdoing. So that's the best thing that you can do. And maybe it hurts, and maybe you can't smooth it over. It's ugly. But if you let it out and you're transparent, it will die a lot quicker than if you were to drag it out and it drip, 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 drip over many months or years or decades or hundreds of years in this case. So it's an institution that is like other institutions that are flawed, that doesn't own up to its wrongdoings, and this is just further proof of that.
Well, and I think we have to wonder why it is that the Pope was not willing to go all the way and actually admitting what happened here and apologizing for what happened here. And I think fundamentally, the Church doesn't really believe that what it did was wrong. He apologized for people dying, so he's at least willing to admit that's wrong. But the fundamental principle of the schools, which was the forced conversion of indigenous people to Christianity, the Church absolutely does not believe that what it did was wrong. And it's still to this day, as I said, when it was giving those $25 million worth of in-kind services to the victims of residential schools, it continued the same project of trying to indoctrinate them into the Catholic faith. It absolutely does not believe that the colonial mission of finding indigenous peoples in North America and forcibly converting them to Christianity was wrong.
Well, they still won't revoke the doctrine of discovery.
The doctrine of discovery, exactly. That's what I mean. There's still...
But explain to our listeners what that is. Give them a little context.
Well, it's essentially the idea that any Christians that find any new land, that even if it is populated with people, if those people are not Christians, they don't really own the land. And so it's your job as a Christian in the universal Catholic faith to proselytize as much as possible in new lands and to try and use whatever tools at your disposal to convert the people at those lands. So it's a way of encouraging colonialization. It's a way of encouraging, to be perfectly honest, genocide against indigenous peoples and clearing out indigenous peoples from the areas that they sit on so that Christians can take over that land. They haven't rescinded that idea because they still believe it. And if tomorrow we found some alien planet that was filled with aliens that had their own religion, the Catholic Church would be totally fine with the United States or whatever country decides to go up there and murder all those aliens in the name of Christianity. They would do it all over again. Guaranteed. Guaranteed they do it all over again. They haven't learned a thing. And this is more proof of it. That's why I say that we need to start going after them. Like we cannot accept this. We've, for way too long, accepted the idea that the church should be regulating themselves, that we shouldn't be investigating them, that we shouldn't be charging them, that the church should be exempted from state authority. We can't accept that anymore. They're in Canada. They follow Canadian laws. I don't think there's a single cardinal or bishop that, at this point in their organization, that doesn't deserve to at least do some jail time. The organization is so fundamentally corrupt, and the idea that we're not even investigating them is crazy. They have a history of the worst possible abuse, and we still won't do anything about it. That's completely unacceptable for any other organization in the world. I don't understand why this one would get away with it.
Yeah, I have no idea. It boggles the mind how long this is going on, how little accountability there's been, and how for years that behavior was rewarded by the state. It's, and still is in a lot of ways. Like in a country like this one that we like to say is very free and democratic and open, this is a state failure and a cultural failure. It's a failure on so many levels. And there's been contrition, but there's been a very insignificant apology from the institution that helped perpetuate that.
Well, the thing that most annoys me about this whole thing is that, as I said, in that $25 million settlement to Indigenous victims of the Indian residential schools, the church was barely able to cough up $4 million to them. At the same time, they did a campaign to build a new cathedral in Saskatoon that raised $28 million. So this is a very wealthy organization that can always find money when it needs to be building, bigger cathedrals or bigger mansions for their bishops. There's always money for that. But when there's money for the victims of the sexual assault and of the murders that they committed, no, there's not a single dime that can be coughed up. This is not a corporation that just owns tens of millions of dollars. It's not a corporation that just owns hundreds of millions of dollars of property. This is a corporation that owns trillions of dollars of property all around the world. And we still will not think about taxing.
I want to put it down to this principle so everybody understands where I'm coming from and where I think Jacob is coming from as well. We, both of us, are huge believers in religious freedom, in the principle that you can practice the faith that you want to practice, that you are free from discrimination in that regard. However, we are also big believers in the separation of church and state. And there aren't very many vestiges of the time. There are a lot of cultural vestiges, but there aren't very many state vestiges of the time where we were all very religious, where humanity, particularly Western humanity, was just very religious. Obviously, some old churches around and some old traditions, but there's only a handful of state vestiges. And one of them is property taxes and churches being exempt from them. And the other is, in some provinces in Canada, is state-funded religious education. I have no problems with the religious education. I take issue with the state funding that.
Absolutely.
Similarly with churches and other religious establishments, this view doesn't target any one religion. It targets religion as a whole. Religious institutions are valuable for millions of people in Canada, for billions across the world, and should exist and should thrive, but not funded by the state or helped by the state. They need to pay property taxes like anywhere else. So I believe that people should practice what they want to practice, no matter, that's up to you. That's your freedom. That's your religious freedom. The state should not be assisting that, imposing that in any way.
Well, and what churches will say in response is that we are a charity. We're performing charitable operations. And many churches do. But as I mentioned, in that $25 million that got written off as in-kind donations, many of the charitable activities that churches are doing are intentionally designed to promote the religion and to convert people into the religion. And so from my point of view, that's not charity. That's just going after future revenue sources. The more people you convert to your religion, the more people you have paying tithes, the more people donating to your church. That's just a business that's trying to get more customers. That is not a charity.
And yes, you're absolutely right. And like, I want people to understand, like, of course, everybody likes going to the church yard sales and the church strawberry dinner. Sure, churches sometimes feed hungry people or they help with refugees or whatever. Like, I'm not saying some churches don't do good work, but it's just the principle of, especially with bigger churches, the goal is to proselytize. You're proselytizers. That's the ultimate goal. And that's okay, like you're allowed to recruit people to your religion, but you're going to gain bigger and bigger amounts of income, and in any other format, in any other category of society, that would be tax, and it's not.
Yeah, I was like, I'm totally fine with you doing that, but I sure as hell don't want my tax dollars going to you doing that.
It's the same reason that Netflix gets, that I get annoyed when Netflix gets to raise the price on us by $3 every year, and they're still not paying tax in this country. Like that,
yeah, I agree.
It's just shocking. I know the price would go up even more. I don't care, because they should be paying their fair share. They're not.
Yeah,
so
concur. Well, and we just had the news story this week of the preacher of a mega church in New York. He got mobbed while he was on stage, and $1 million in jewelry was robbed from him. This preacher, again, a man of God, a man of worship, was wearing $1 million in jewelry in front of a crowd of 1,000 people. And, he's getting upset that he was robbed, obviously. But I think the bigger question is, why do we have a society where priests are wearing $1 million in jewelry to begin with? This is stuff that we'd be reading about like in the Renaissance, and when in the days when the Medicis or the Borgias were buying their ways into the papacy. Why is this stuff still continuing? It's because the state is not intervening. The state is letting grifters and the most corrupt crooks that we've ever seen enter the church, and they're making money hand over fist. At some point, this has to be stopped. They're just a tax on people who have nowhere else to turn to but religion, and everyone that's been preaching this prosperity doctrine, they're all saying the same thing. It's pay me as much money as you can, and eventually God will return the favor. There's not a word of that is written in the Bible, but that doesn't matter to any of these people, and they're making millions, untold millions. It cannot continue to go on. It's pure theft. Pure theft.
Yeah.
And for some reason, because it's a religion, we don't want to get involved.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the long and short of it. That's the principle of this entire conversation. And I don't think it's going to change anytime soon, because we've been lacking competent government for about I'd say at least 20 years. getting close. If you want to be really harsh, I would say 30 years, 40 years. Like, it's been, a long time since we've had competent, ambitious government that checks things off their list. I'd like to talk about another topic. We could switch gears, and maybe you can cool down, I can cool down.
Absolutely. Let's do it. Yes.
Because I know I sound really angry right now. So we're going to talk about Liz May and her comeback.
Oh, you wanted me to stop being angry.
Actually, no, I want to hear you. Let's who wants more angry Jacob? That's what I thought. All right. We hear you. All right. Shh, quiet. Shut up. Okay. All right. Jacob is going to talk about Elizabeth May.
Just announced that she's going to be running again for the leadership of the Green Party. I know, complete surprise. This outsider, this new one on the block is going to take over the Green Party and change everything. Oh, wait, sorry, I'm just reading my notes from the 90s. Holy fuck, why are we still like this? Nothing has changed. Why are we in 2022 still talking about Elizabeth May running for leadership of the Green Party? Holy hell.
Because it's her vanity project.
It's become a vanity project. It is so nonsensical that we're living in a world where Europe is on fire. We have thousands of people are dying in this horrible heat wave caused by climate change. The dangers of a warming climate are becoming so apparent they can't even be papered over. And still, the Green Party is competing for relevance. And why is the Green Party competing for relevance in a world where green policies are needed more than ever? It's because they cannot stop fighting themselves for 3 fucking seconds to focus on selling a message to the public. And why are they doing that? Well, it's because there's one person who just cannot get her cold, stiff, dead hands off the steering wheel of this ship. Elizabeth May. I loved watching her in every debate and every federal election campaign that she was in. She was always great. She always held the prime minister up to task. But she just did not have what it took to take that party to the next level. And she absolutely refused on every possible occasion to learn that lesson. And she still hasn't learned it. Herself and her supporters, they stabbed Annamie Paul in the back. The first woman of color leader of any major political party. Completely ruined her career. Destroyed her mental health, it seems like. That's not enough, though, for Elizabeth May. As you said, it's all vanity. And she's going to completely ruin what could have been one of the best vehicles for climate-conscious progressives to unite in an alternative against Justin Trudeau. Instead, she's completely going to ruin that opportunity and bring the Green Party into further irrelevance.
She already has. She did that with Annamie Paul. And this is just the continuation of that. It should surprise no one that she doesn't know when to go away. And I understand that she's only running as co-leader. I don't care. She's running. There's no need for her to run. She was leader from 2006 on.
Yeah.
That's a long time. You don't understand. When you're leader of a party for that long, you take over the mechanisms of the party. You own the party, and she owns them. She never had the competence to expand her game. Part of her harm, for sure, is the system that we're under. I totally get that. Of course, they'd have more seats if we were under a different system. That is true. But you have to work under the system that you're given, and they've never been able to broaden themselves enough to be able to get more seats. They just haven't. And she had 13 years to try, and she just wasn't good enough. It just wasn't good enough. So she purportedly resigned to hand the reins over, then proceeded to meddle throughout the ex-leader's entire term, or virtually the entire term. Now she's running again. It's like, for God's sakes, woman. It's not about misogyny. It's I would say this to any party leader. You know what I think of Trudeau being around for that long, and he hasn't even been around for as long as she has. She's been around twice as long as he has as the leader.
Take a break.
It's ridiculous. If you're a politician and you can't take a hint and you're just going to turn your party into your vanity project, your party will be destroyed. Crippled, possibly for decades. Possibly. Hopefully not. But, they're a sinking ship, and it could be irreparable if they don't do something about it soon. Pick a different leader, for God's sakes.
No, I think it's very much just the Max Bernier phenomenon in the PPC, that she's turning the Green Party into a left-wing PPC of the whole party is just a vehicle for her to raise membership sales so that she can fund her own lifestyle where she gets to stand in parliament, or she gets to go around making speeches, being on her high horse and being morally right and not having to actually do anything real. That's all Max Bernier's doing. It's a pyramid scheme. She's completely given up any chance of actually being politically relevant, because if she wanted her party to have a piece of power, she would have left it many years ago. If she's going to be in charge of it, all it is just going to be a personality cult where she's extracting the members' fees to pay for her own lifestyle. That's all it can ever possibly be with her in leadership. And I'm sure that her and many Green Party supporters that are friends and podcast listeners would be very upset to hear that. But unfortunately, it's the truth. It's going to be the truth the longer that she stays in.
When do you have a conversation about what kind of party that you ultimately want to be? I know that they were created in a time where climate advocacy isn't what it is, and it's still pathetic, in terms of how little has happened in Canada, but climate advocacy is much bigger than it once was. There was a time and place for them to exist. They've not been able to broaden themselves now in an era where all parties are at least trying to do something about climate change. They've not broadened themselves enough to get enough votes under our crappy system to be relevant. They just haven't. And you need to have a value proposition for voters. If you're aiming to at least gain official party status, you've got to have a value proposition that galvanizes enough people And it doesn't have to be tens of millions. It doesn't even have to be millions. It could be like, a million or less. And just, it's all about where you distribute the votes. If your vote efficiency is high, if they can find what it takes to get their vote efficiency high, the way to do it is not a leader that you've had since 2006. It's just not. People need a new reason to vote for you, and you also need to present new ideas. And they have presented some good ideas, but it was delivered by a leader who just hasn't been able to deliver. They need a chance to deliver good ideas, marketed in a different way by a different leader. Some would say, well, Annamie Paul already did that. Well, she didn't. She wasn't able to. And her own comms and her own mistakes were part of some of the reason why she got blowback, for sure. But a large part of the reason she got blowback was because she's a woman of color, and because she's not Elizabeth May, or somebody who would do what Elizabeth May's wing and Elizabeth May wants them to do. They have a serious power struggle in that party. It's like a toxic ex who just doesn't know when to go away. Like, I don't know what else to say. And, Elizabeth May is a notable figure in Canadian politics for sure. She got a seat. She managed to get up to 3. She made a stamp. She's well liked. Like, people always generally liked her, but people are awful tired of her now.
And you have the Green Party in Germany that's getting 20, closer to almost 25% of the vote. The Green Party was contending for government.
I mean, granted, they have a much different system.
It is true. They do have a very different system with the MMP.
MMP would give the Greens here 25 seats easily.
It would, yes, but it wouldn't. Yeah. But the MMP would give them more seats, but it wouldn't give them a higher percentage of the vote, which is what I'm suggesting, that they've been totally cut out of political conversation. They cut themselves out of the political conversation.
Oh, it's complete self-sabotage. You just watched the green dumpster fire burn over the course of 2 years. It's really sad. It's really sad.
Well, I've definitely thought of many times about joining the Green Party. I've had friends that I know from Carleton that have ran the Green Party, and they seem like a party that would absolutely share some of my values.
Same.
But every time that I'm just about to jump ship, there'd be something like this would happen.
They do something stupid.
There'd be some stupid infighting that would just made me really turned off from joining the party. I don't want to participate my level of effort and interest in a party that is going to burn me because I'm not sufficiently inculcated in the great and wonderful teachings of Elizabeth May. It's remarkable that an issue that has so much cachet, that has so much relevance in our day-to-day life, is being squandered by the party that could be making that issue its ticket to power.
Yeah, that sums her up right there. And before we kind of start to tidy things up and send everybody heading towards the exit, let's pivot to our friends down south, our good friends in the south, and their new climate bill. I think it's a $300+ billion US climate bill, which includes a new North American EV credit, which was purportedly going to be just an American EV credit and would have decimated Canada's auto sector. We are pivoting hard towards EVs. Doug Ford, the Conservative Premier of Ontario, is pivoting hard towards EV production, despite the fact that he won't offer anything to make EVs more affordable. At least he's ramping up production. It would have devastated Ontario. It would have been so hurtful for one of the heartbeats of central Canada. And luckily, the government was able to put pressure on U.S. Congress people and were able to get them to work that rewording in. And so that's a big win. And this climate bill came out of a deal with none other than Joe Manchin, everybody's favorite, quote-unquote, Democratic senator, everybody's favorite guy, Joe Manchin. So in some sort of ass-backwards way, Joe Manchin saved the Canadian auto sector.
What a gracious savior he is.
So there's that. So I think that's huge news. It's huge news for the future of our economy, for adoption of EVs in Canada. I think it's huge to be able to have the national capacity to pump out our own EVs. It'll help lower the price. Rebates or not, it will. Rebates will help. It's a big deal. So I'm really happy to see that.
But it is important to note that this still sort of shows that Canada is a bit of an afterthought in American thinking on this issue. We're not as relevant here as we once were. And I'll make fun of Danielle Smith for the way that she went about it, but the idea of growing our own investment in Canada and not having to rely on other partners like the United States, it's a reasonable message to be taking away from this, so that we relied essentially on the good graces of a single senator to keep tens of thousands of jobs in this province of Ontario. And we really shouldn't be putting ourselves in a position where we're that vulnerable anymore. We've been so reliant on this mammoth to the south, whose actions are becoming much less predictable. We need to find a better way to navigate this changing world, this world of climate change, this net zero world. And we're not hearing many solutions for doing this. Right now, we're really just holding our hands open and begging the Americans to give us their scraps, rather than planning a real just transition, which the Green Party, again, to wrap everything together, the Green Party could be showing us this map for a just transition. But we're not seeing it right now.
Pretty brutal, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
How do we get out of it? I know, like, decreasing dependence on the U.S., but how? How do we suspend ourselves after we're weaning off this mammoth? You know, it's a huge question.
Well, I think Canada has a wealth of the resources that are necessary for a post-climate catastrophe world. And we have a huge amount of uranium. We have like the second largest amount of fresh water in the world. And then in the north, we have a vast amounts of gold and other rare earth that are going to be uncovered by the tundra as it's unfrozen. We have a lot of what's necessary to build a zero carbon infrastructure. So the question is not really about whether or not we'll always find another partner to invest in us. We'll always find someone that wants to invest in our resources and use these resources because we have what is going to be necessary to build a zero carbon future. But for some reason, we're still so connected to the United States and so culturally connected and so dependent on them for everything that we're sort of signing blank checks to them for much of these resources that we ourselves should be investing, that the Canadian government and particularly the provinces should be taking more of an ownership role in and developing ourselves. And one of the greatest, to really bring this back and talk about colonialism in general, that we've been treated for hundreds of years as if this is just an empty place with no people and a bunch of resources that countries from all around the world are trying to take everything we have for themselves. But we, I think, are finally in Canada on the cusp of realizing that we're not just a colony of the Americans or of the British or of the French. We're actually our own people with our own destiny, with our own future, and we're sitting on literally a gold mine to what could be the most prosperous Canada we've ever imagined. If only we have the courage to find new partners, to think outside the box,
right,
and to invest in ourselves rather than just letting the Americans tell us how things should be. We have everything necessary in this country for success except courage. That's really all we need at this point, I'd say.
Yeah, otherwise we'll just continue to be a mediocre bastion of regulatory mess.
Yeah.
So, it's not that there aren't things to love, but let's quit rehashing the same things we love and build on them and add more things we love.
Absolutely.
And the charter helped, but it's not done. We can't just, the charter is the thing, let's just stop building on this nation.
That was the last systemic change we had, was in 1982.
The last major systemic change we had, and there's been, there have been major court rulings. I'm not talking about in terms of law and order. I'm talking about in how our nation functions and the kind of things that we offer people, how we treat our people.
We tried with Meech Lake and we tried with the Charlottetown Accord, and 2 failures, and I guess we were done. We're never going to try again? Like, is that really how we're going to end?
Well, we live in such a time of hyper-politicization, and what comes with that is a risk aversion for things that people don't see on their electoral path to victory. If it's an unnecessary risk, they won't do it.
Yeah.
So there's just no appetite for it. I think there is from the people, but there's no appetite from the ruling class at all for any of that. There has to be a paradigm shift, and for that you need a change maker, and unfortunately the current crop of leaders in this country don't seem to really offer that.
Well, that's the thing, Liam, is like I can see 2 distinct but unfortunately equally likely futures. There's one where we use all of our resources and all of our ingenuity and all of these climate refugees that are coming to Canada, and the fact that Canada is by far the best country in the world at integrating new immigrants to its society. We take all these advantages and we find new partners outside the United States. We find new trading opportunities and we become a superpower. Or 2, the United States sees all of these resources and sees a country in complete disarray, and they just take us over.
And that might sound outlandish, folks, but we're talking about if there's a hypothetical authoritarian militant government, which is not out of the question.
Or we're talking about with climate change, who knows what's going to happen? I mean, the Americans are nice now, but after 10 years of of drought and starvation throughout the country, because that's what's going to happen very soon. Who knows how nice these people are going to be, right?
Desperation either provokes cooperation or it provokes isolation, and the U.S. in a lot of ways is becoming more isolationist. I think if they keep trying to preserve democratic norms, maybe they won't be as radical. I tend to think that it's more likely they'll become radical if they stop the pursuit of democracy and stop the preservation of democracy and start to tread the long path towards authoritarianism. It's not to say that a democratic U.S. couldn't come after us in some ways, because they already have, and we've had to beg them to give us a break on a lot of things. But imagine how far more aggressive they'd be under an authoritarian Donald Trump Jr. or whoever's going to be leader and when the seas are flooding the coasts. It's already happening. It's not long until we're really starting to notice it.
They've so mismanaged their agriculture. They're desperately in need of water. And we're a country that has a lot of water, but not a lot of people to defend it. You don't need to use your imagination that hard to think about how we can be in trouble. But you also don't have to use your imagination that hard to think about how we could do really, really well. And it's upsetting to me that when we have these two roads, we're choosing to go down the path that leads to danger rather than the path where we could be investing in ourselves and becoming the best possible version of ourselves. That's the really upsetting part. If we were fucked always, what does it matter? But we're not. We're not guaranteed to be down the toilet. We actually have quite a few opportunities for success. We're choosing to fail by not thinking bigger.
And on that usually cheery note, we hope you enjoyed listening.
We are the most optimistic guys on Spotify, aren't we?
Yeah, seriously. We hope you enjoyed listening to this week's episode. If you have something to say to us about this or literally anything else, you can reach out to us at speechfromthethrone@gmail.com. That's all one word, lowercase, speechfromthethrone@gmail.com. And we will talk to you in the next one.
Bye.